Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. Welcome back to the one and only r/EntitledParents. Now, I haven't been on this sub for quite a while, so let's not waste another second and get straight into this first post by user/ND1online. Over the years, I've noticed that the worst culprits for choosing beggars are usually family members. Especially the random ones who are sort of related to you, but you know, deep down, you don't really know each other all that well. This incident actually occurred quite a long time ago, over 10 years ago, and I've almost forgotten about it until someone reminded me about it last weekend. Way back, over 10 years ago, I just got a promotion to a new role, and I bought some new tools, including a new Apple Macbook for work. I was living in London at the time and was in a small flat/apartment, which meant space was a premium. So I decided that I should get rid of some of the stuff in the house. One of those was a PC that was a few years old at the time. Back then, my grandma used to call me up every few days just to chat about stuff. And I mentioned to her about the promotion and the new stuff I bought and the old stuff I'm giving away. And being an old lady whose hobby was basically phone calls to the family, she passed this news on to a few relatives. One of my aunts heard the news and told her younger kid. A few days later, my aunt and her kid called me up and said they'll take my computer. Great! Come over to my place and collect them. They drove over the next day and then turned it into a long argument with me once they arrived. For some reason, probably due to the fact that my grandma doesn't really know about computers and stuff, or my aunt misheard it, or whatever, they thought they were picking up my brand new MacBook instead of the few-year-old desktop. My aunt, being an adult, at least understood it must be a miscommunication. My little cousin, though, was throwing a huge tantrum over it. In my house. He kept going on about how trash the specs of the machine were and how it would be useless to him. And bear in mind, he wasn't like an 8-year-old at the time. He was 13 years old. Still a kid, I know, but should be at an age at which he understands that his distant cousin, me, isn't going to randomly give him a brand new computer just for homework. My aunt was trying to get the computer out of my place, and I just wanted to get them and the computer out of my house, and my girlfriend just wanted all the crying. Yep, a 13-year-old boying was quite a scene, noises to stop, so she could focus on her work. In the end, they just left. Empty-handed, of course, since the kid doesn't want the old PC, and I wasn't ready to give him my new one. I thought that was that, but then, later that night, my uncle, my cousin's entitled dad, called me up and demanded an explanation of why I back out of a deal. And that wasn't the way to treat family. The phone call ended with me hanging up on him, which led to a lecture from my grandma the next day over the phone and took me an hour to explain what happened. And that led to a lecture from her to my uncle, which led to more phone calls and arguments. My uncle complained that now his son has no computer to use, and I told him he can still pick up my computer, which is still sitting in my house at the time. I didn't get an answer until 2 days later, and he sent me a list of things he wants me to upgrade to the computer that I'm planning to give away, with my own money. Obviously, I just ignored them at the time. And good job, my family always has a lot of drama. Probably stirred up by my very bored grandma, come to think of it. So very soon, everyone was on the new storyline to follow. And what happened to the computer? I ended up giving it to a neighbor on the same floor to whom I'd talked a few times. They were in a less fortunate position than us, and their 2 teenage children at the time used to use the computers at school and at the library for their homework. Once my girlfriend found out about that, it was a natural place to send my computer to. At first, they refused it because they couldn't give me money for it. But we weren't looking to take any money anyway because A, it wasn't worth all that much anyway, and B, it was much easier to bring the damn thing across a few doors than anywhere else. They were our neighbors for a few more years before I moved away from the block. I didn't even think much of what happened to it anymore, until recently when I was contacted by the older one of the 2 children. Apparently, he had just graduated from university and just started a job. We talked about a few things, and he thanked me again for giving him the computer all those years ago. Apparently, it's still being used by their parents at their home. It's funny how things can turn out sometimes. And pretty sure my cousin still hasn't forgiven me for not giving him the MacBook. And I guess one man's trash is another's treasure, and this story really goes to show us. And here's our next post by user/Ghost of Sarabi. I am perhaps fortunate that in my line of work, I rarely encounter entitled parents. But reading these stories has reminded me of an incident that took place many years ago. I was working for a small dance and theatre production company in the 70s. One day, the boss decided we needed to clean our dance floor. Essentially, half a dozen rolls of very heavy-duty black lino. We did a lot of work with ballet companies, and consequently, the floor got covered in dancers' rosin, a rather sticky powder-like substance that ballet dancers use on their dance shoes for grip, which needed cleaning down periodically. The quickest way we found to do this was to haul the whole shebang down to the local foreshore along the Thames, roll it out into the water, and then give it a good going over with a stiff bristled broom. Work the treat and would only take 20 minutes. On this day, it was extremely cold, so I elected to get into my wetsuit, as I'd have to walk one end of the roll out into the river and didn't fancy freezing my butt off standing around in old Father Thames. As I walked out the third roll, I felt a rather odd sensation in my right foot. Something was clearly off, so I walked back up to the foreshore. It felt as if the ball of my foot was flapping about as if it had somehow been disconnected from the rest of my foot. Stepping out the water, I saw that my foot was bleeding like a stuck pig. I had apparently trodden on a large piece of broken glass that had sliced right through my plimsolls and straight into my foot. Aghast, my boss rapidly wrangled the floor section we'd been cleaning into the van, and we head off post-haste to the nearest A&E, accident and emergency. 10 minutes later, I'm sat on a chair in the very busy waiting room, still in my wetsuit with a sweatshirt tightly wrapped around my foot while the boss checks me in. I'm still losing blood like it's going out of fashion. Obviously, I've sliced into some major blood vessels, and there's a pool of blood accumulating on the floor despite the temporary bandage. As you might imagine, I'm also starting to feel rather faint and very out of sorts. It was at this juncture that the Karen manifested in all her glory. Sat almost opposite was, as I have subsequently discovered, a stereotypical Karen, sporting a coiffure of indeterminate provenance and an expression like she'd consumed enough lemons to populate the glasses of every single gin and tonic drinker in the country. Sat with her was her glum-looking 9-year-old. "Excuse me, would you mind not bleeding all over the floor in front of my son? It's making him feel sick." Seriously? Despite my weakened state, I felt affronted. What would you like me to do? Go and find a needle and thread and sew it up myself? Remarkably, the lemon-sucking expression intensified. "Why don't you sit somewhere else?" It was at this point that decorum departed for sunnier climes. I gave her both barrels at close range and at high volume. "Why don't you F off and sit somewhere else if it bothers you so much? You can clearly see that walking around with a severely gashed foot is going to be something of a problem for me. You, on the other hand, seem to be perfectly capable of getting up off your fat butt with minimal effort. If you're that bothered, F off somewhere else." If looks could kill, I would have died on the spot, but I continued to stare her down. At this point, my boss comes back from checking me in. He parks his 6'2" frame in front of her and in a low but menacing voice starts to curse her out. In Russian. Karen goes white and grabbing her son's hand scurries off to the other side of the waiting room. Shortly thereafter, I get called into a consulting room. And 13 stitches and a pint of blood later, I'm sent home to recuperate. My boss took me home and on the way back, I asked him what he'd said to Karen. "My mother's recipe for borscht." And an addition, Karen's son was in for the removal of a tiny wood splinter in his pinky. I don't see what the issue is with taking out a splinter, which I think is less important than a foot that's been chopped in half. And here's our next post by user/SheOpex. This was back when I was 13. I was hanging around a village park in the middle of a summer day. Literally just chatting and sitting on the grass with a mixed gender group of around 6 other 13-year-olds. Seemingly out of nowhere, this sweet little girl appeared, who we later found out to be 7 years old, and starts chatting to us about her pet dog and schoolwork and stuff. We were all completely confused and asking where her mother or father were, and she just kept saying, "I dunno, so my dog." The little girl starts getting agitated and running about, trying to climb on trees and splash in the stream nearby, so we decided we had to do something before she got hurt. A couple of the guys and girls decided to distract her by playing tag, treating her with kindness and running around the field with her. She was giggling and having fun. Meanwhile, one of the boys, Sam and I, rang his mum, who lived very nearby, to ask what the F we should do with this abandoned child. Just as Sam's mum was coming up with a response, we hear this almighty screech from the other side of the park. It's the EM finally returning to collect her sprog. "Get the F off my little girl, you." We froze, like, what the F? We're 13 and trying to play an innocent game with a lost kid in an open and public space, while we call an adult for help. This adult woman continues to chew us out, focusing on Sam particularly, as he had a buff frame and looked far older than 13. She starts calling him all sorts of things. Disgusting, vile, inappropriate. Poor Sam was a sensitive guy and was almost in tears. She starts asking why we thought it was appropriate to play tag with and speak to a little girl, and we were just bemused. We were kids ourselves and just wanted to protect her from getting hurt. Looking back at the situation, I understand that we should have called the police immediately to protect us from lunatics like EM. But at the time, we were kids and didn't know what to do. Anyway, it turns out this woman lived on the other side of the park and had basically just let her kid wander out the door, and it took her a good 10 minutes to even realize she was missing. And a good reply to this woman would have been just asking, "What do you think you're doing letting your kid run around unsupervised through a park? That's pretty irresponsible." Alright everyone, that's it from me for today. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I did. And if you did, make sure to subscribe to the channel for Reddit videos every second day. But with that said, that is it from me. I hope you all enjoyed, and all I want to do is see you all here next time. See you later, guys.